Glenview, Illinois, a quiet suburban community located just 20 miles north of Chicago, was rocked by an unthinkable crime on October 4, 1999. In a town known for its manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and low crime rates, a tragedy unfolded that would leave a lasting scar on the community. Leslie Harper, a 48-year-old librarian and mother of 3, was found brutally murdered in the parking lot of the local public library, a place she had worked for nearly 2 decades. Her lifeless body was discovered near her minivan, a gruesome scene that sent shockwaves through the normally peaceful town. Leslie had been shot twice, once in the head, once in the chest, in what appeared to be a targeted, execution-style killing. The image of her body slumped against the door of her van, her blood pooling on the cold asphalt, would haunt the minds of Glenview's residents for years to come. Who would want to harm Leslie, a woman beloved by her community and admired for her dedication to her family and her work? The brutality of the crime led investigators to believe this was not a random act of violence. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure her death. In the days following the murder, Glenview's small police department found itself overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the case. It wasn't long before the Illinois State Police were called in to assist. The case gained immediate attention, as the shocking nature of the crime seemed out of place in such an idyllic suburb. It wasn't just the violence that unnerved the town, it was the growing sense that something much darker was lurking behind the facade of a typical American family. The Harpers had long been viewed as the model suburban family. Leslie and her husband, Michael Harper, had been married for over 20 years and had 3 children, all of whom were now in their late teens or early 20s. Michael, a local businessman, had built a reputation as a successful and community-oriented man. But as the police began to peel back the layers of their life, they discovered a family in turmoil. Their seemingly perfect marriage was unraveling, plagued by secrets that would soon come to light. The first major breakthrough came when Michael Harper, consumed by guilt and unable to maintain his facade, admitted to investigators that he had been having an affair. His mistress, Rebecca Pierce, was a successful and well-known businesswoman from the neighboring city of Evanston. She and Michael had been romantically involved for nearly a year, and Michael confessed that the affair had created serious tension in his marriage to Leslie. Despite this, Leslie had been determined to hold the family together, even as Michael's indiscretions became more difficult to ignore. Michael's confession shifted the investigation in a new direction. Detectives began to focus their attention on both Michael and Rebecca. They considered the possibility that Leslie's murder was a result of the affair, a way for Michael to free himself from the constraints of his marriage without facing the financial and social fallout of a divorce. But when both Michael and Rebecca provided solid alibis for the time of the murder, investigators were left with more questions than answers. Someone had killed Leslie Harper, but if not her husband or his lover, then who? As the investigation intensified, detectives turned to surveillance footage from the library parking lot. The grainy black and white video showed a man dressed in all black approaching Leslie's van just minutes before her body was discovered. The figure moved with purpose, pulling out a gun and firing twice before disappearing into the shadows. It was a chilling piece of evidence, but the poor quality of the footage made it difficult to identify the shooter. However, the video provided a crucial lead. Someone else had been involved in the murder. Witnesses came forward to report seeing a car speeding away from the parking lot shortly after the shots were fired. Most notably, several witnesses mentioned seeing a woman behind the wheel of the car, though her identity remained a mystery. The case was quickly becoming a tangled web of deceit and betrayal, but the most shocking revelations were yet to come. As investigators continued to probe deeper into Leslie Harper's murder, they uncovered more details that pointed to a carefully orchestrated plot. Rebecca Pierce, the woman at the center of Michael Harper's affair, became a key focus of the investigation. Though she initially appeared cooperative, providing an airtight alibi and expressing shock at Leslie's death, detectives began to notice inconsistencies in her statements. Rebecca's rise to success as a businesswoman was marked by ambition, and as her connection to the murder grew, so did the suspicions surrounding her true involvement. It wasn't long before the investigation took a darker turn. The police discovered that Rebecca had recently told close friends and coworkers that she was pregnant with Michael's child, a fact that could have dramatically altered the dynamics of their relationship. However, upon further inquiry, it was revealed that Rebecca had faked the pregnancy. She had never been pregnant at all, a lie that served to manipulate Michael and heighten the emotional stakes of their affair. This deception painted a picture of a woman willing to go to extreme lengths to secure her future with Michael and perhaps to remove any obstacles in her way, namely Leslie. The detective soon learned that Rebecca hadn't acted alone. Two of her subordinates at her company, Emily Walker and Jordan Miller, were brought in for questioning after their names surfaced in anonymous tips. Both Emily and Jordan worked closely with Rebecca, and while they initially denied any involvement in the crime, pressure from law enforcement eventually broke down their defenses. It was revealed that Rebecca had approached them in the months leading up to the murder with a chilling proposition. She wanted them to kill Leslie Harper. So both Emily and Jordan admitted that Rebecca had tried to recruit them to carry out the murder, offering them substantial sums of money and the promise of future career benefits if they complied. However, both employees had refused, unable to stomach the thought of killing another person. Still, their involvement in the conspiracy didn't end there. Both Emily and Jordan were privy to Rebecca's ongoing efforts to find someone else willing to do the job. That someone was Noel Rodriguez, a man with a troubled past and a growing list of debts. Investigators uncovered that Rebecca had eventually hired Noel, promising him a large payout in exchange for Leslie's murder. Noel, desperate for the money, had agreed to take on the task, and on that fateful day in October he followed through with the plan. He had been the one seen in the surveillance footage, dressed in black, firing the shots that ended Leslie Harper's life. As the puzzle pieces started to come together, investigators searched Emily Walker's house, where they found damning evidence that tied Rebecca directly to the planning of the murder. Handwritten notes, outlines of the plot, and communications between Rebecca and Noel were discovered, painting a clear picture of a carefully planned execution. Despite her attempts to distance herself, Rebecca Pierce was now at the center of a criminal conspiracy, one that left an innocent woman dead and a community in shock. With the confessions of Noel Rodriguez and the cooperation of Emily Walker and Jordan Miller, the case was beginning to reach its climax. But the full scope of Rebecca's manipulations and the devastating impact of her jealousy and ambition were only just starting to come to light. The tragic murder of Leslie Harper was not merely a crime of passion but a calculated and cold-blooded scheme orchestrated by a woman willing to do anything to get what she wanted. With Noel Rodriguez in custody and the confessions of Emily Walker and Jordan Miller providing crucial evidence, the Glenview Police Department now had enough to piece together the disturbing details of the conspiracy that led to Leslie Harper's murder. The once inexplicable crime began to take on a chilling clarity, revealing a tangled web of manipulation, deceit, and ruthless ambition. The investigation zeroed in on Rebecca Pierce, whose outward success and polished public persona masked a much darker reality. She had risen to prominence in Evanston's business community, a self-made woman who built her company from the ground up. But behind her carefully curated image lay a deeply insecure and calculating personality. Investigators discovered that Rebecca's obsession with Michael Harper had grown over time, turning from an affair into something far more dangerous. Though Michael had been entangled in the affair, he claimed he had never intended to leave his wife. For Rebecca, however, the relationship was her way out of a failing business and personal life. Her company, which had appeared thriving, was actually on the verge of collapse due to poor financial decisions. Rebecca had seen in Michael not only a romantic partner but a potential savior. His steady income and reputation in Glenview made him an ideal future husband, and she viewed Leslie Harper as the single obstacle standing in her way. When Michael refused to leave Leslie, Rebecca's desperation grew. Her fake pregnancy was an attempt to force Michael's hand, but when that plan unraveled, her focus shifted to a more sinister solution, eliminating Leslie altogether. Rebecca's cold logic led her to seek out help, first turning to her employees, Emily Walker and Jordan Miller. When they refused, she found someone even more vulnerable, Noel Rodriguez, a man drowning in gambling debts and legal troubles. Rodriguez, who had no personal connection to the Harpers or Rebecca, was an outsider to the affluent suburban world in which the others lived. His financial struggles had made him easy prey for Rebecca's manipulations. Desperate for a way out of his debts, Noel had agreed to Rebecca's offer, a decision that sealed Leslie's fate and set the wheels of the murder plot in motion. On October 4, 1999, Noel followed Rebecca's instructions to the letter, waiting for Leslie in the parking lot of the library where she worked. When Leslie emerged from the building after her shift, Noel approached her and fired 2 shots before fleeing the scene, leaving behind the chaos that would soon envelop Glenview. As more details of the conspiracy were uncovered, the police realized that Rebecca had meticulously planned each aspect of the murder. She had chosen a location where Leslie would be vulnerable, timed the attack to occur when there were few witnesses, and created layers of separation between herself and the crime. But despite her attempts to cover her tracks, her arrogance proved to be her downfall. She had left behind too many loose ends, relying on people like Emily and Jordan, who were unwilling to go down with her, and Noel Rodriguez, who quickly cracked under the pressure of interrogation. In the days leading up to her arrest, Rebecca tried to maintain her innocence, continuing to project the image of a shocked and devastated woman. She feigned disbelief when the police began to focus their investigation on her, providing emotional statements to the press about the tragedy of Leslie's death. But behind the scenes, investigators had amassed a mountain of evidence, from phone records to bank transfers linking her directly to the murder. The arrest of Noel Rodriguez had been the turning point. Once he confessed, it was only a matter of time before Rebecca's entire plot unraveled. As detectives closed in on Rebecca, the town of Glenview was gripped by a sense of disbelief. How could someone like Rebecca, a respected businesswoman with no previous criminal record, have orchestrated such a brutal murder? The answer lay in the psychological profile that began to emerge as investigators dug deeper into her past. Rebecca Pierce, it seemed, was a woman who thrived on control. She was used to getting what she wanted, and when things didn't go her way, she would stop at nothing to regain the upper hand. The confessions of Emily Walker and Jordan Miller painted a disturbing picture of Rebecca's manipulation tactics. Both had initially been loyal to her, seeing her as a mentor who had helped them advance in their careers. But over time, they came to realize that their loyalty was being exploited for something far more sinister. Rebecca had first approached Emily in early 1999, suggesting over drinks that certain obstacles in life had to be removed by any means necessary. Emily didn't take the conversation seriously at the time, but as the months passed, Rebecca became more direct, eventually asking her outright if she would help kill Leslie Harper. Emily, horrified, refused, as did Jordan when Rebecca made the same request of him. But even though they turned her down, they remained silent about the plans, either out of fear or misguided loyalty to their employer. It was only after Leslie's death that they began to realize the gravity of what Rebecca had been planning, and when the police came knocking, the weight of their complicity became too much to bear. Their testimonies became crucial in building the case against Rebecca, providing a clear narrative of her obsessive desire to eliminate Leslie and claim Michael for herself. The breakthrough in the case came when police executed a search warrant on Emily Walker's home, a location Rebecca had used for some of her meetings with Noel Rodriguez. In a locked drawer, detectives found a trove of damning evidence, notes in Rebecca's handwriting detailing the plan, instructions for how to avoid detection, and even the initial payment agreement with Noel. This was the final piece of the puzzle that tied Rebecca directly to the crime, leaving her with no room for deniability. On December 15, 1999, Rebecca Pierce was arrested at her office in Evanston, her once pristine reputation shattered. The media frenzy that followed was intense, with reporters camping outside the police station, eagerly documenting every step of her downfall. As Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, the community was left to grapple with the horrifying realization that this had been a premeditated, cold-blooded killing orchestrated by a woman driven by jealousy and ambition. Rebecca's trial would soon follow, but for the residents of Glenview, the damage had already been done. The case revealed the dark underbelly of suburban life, showing that behind the perfect facades of wealth and success, deadly secrets could lurk. What had once seemed like a random, inexplicable murder was now exposed as a carefully constructed plot, driven by nothing more than greed, desperation, and the insidious effects of betrayal. The road to justice, however, was still long, as Rebecca Pierce's defense team prepared for an intense legal battle. The final chapter of this tragic story was yet to be written, but for the Harper family, the grief and loss they had suffered could never truly be undone. The trial of Rebecca Pierce began in the fall of 2000, almost a year after Leslie Harper's murder. The courtroom, packed with reporters, legal teams, and curious onlookers, became the stage for a trial that would grip the public's attention for months. For many, it was hard to reconcile the image of the polished, successful businesswoman with the cold, calculated mastermind behind Leslie's murder. But as the evidence unfolded, any doubts about Rebecca's guilt were quickly put to rest. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Paul Stevenson, laid out the case with meticulous precision. Using the confessions of Emily Walker and Jordan Miller as a foundation, Stevenson detailed how Rebecca had orchestrated the plot to eliminate Leslie Harper. Both Emily and Jordan testified, recounting in chilling detail how Rebecca had manipulated them, gradually revealing her plan to kill Leslie. They described her increasing desperation as Michael Harper refused to leave his wife, and how she eventually turned to Noel Rodriguez to do what they wouldn't. The most damning evidence came from Noel Rodriguez himself. Having agreed to a plea deal in exchange for life in prison, without the possibility of parole, Noel took the stand to describe how Rebecca had hired him to carry out the murder. He explained that Rebecca had promised him $50,000, money he desperately needed to pay off his gambling debts. The prosecution presented bank records showing small payments Rebecca had made to Noel in the weeks leading up to the murder, as well as a final, larger payment that had been promised after Leslie's death. Noel's testimony was devastating. He described the day of the murder in cold, clinical terms: how he had waited in the parking lot for Leslie to finish her shift at the library, how he had approached her without a word, and how he had pulled the trigger twice before fleeing the scene. His confession was not only a damning admission of his own guilt, but also a clear indictment of Rebecca's role in orchestrating the entire crime. Throughout the trial, the prosecution also presented forensic evidence, including the notes found in Emily Walker's house that outlined Rebecca's detailed plan for the murder. The jury was shown copies of Rebecca's own handwriting, comparing it to the notes, further proving her involvement. Cell phone records placed Rebecca in contact with both Noel and Emily on the day of the murder, further tying her to the crime. Rebecca Pierce's defense team, led by high-profile attorney Martin Kane, tried to mount a defense centered around the claim that Rebecca had been manipulated by Noel and that she had never intended for anyone to die. They argued that Rebecca had been emotionally vulnerable due to her failing relationship with Michael, and that Noel, who had a history of violent behavior, had acted on his own initiative. The defense also tried to discredit Emily Walker and Jordan Miller, suggesting that they were exaggerating their claims to escape their own culpability. However, the jury wasn't swayed. The overwhelming evidence of Rebecca's direct involvement, combined with the chilling precision of the murder plot, left little room for doubt. The image of Rebecca as a desperate woman driven by jealousy and greed was difficult to erase. The prosecution's narrative, which painted her as the puppet master pulling the strings, rang true to the jury. The fake pregnancy, the lies to Michael, and the use of her business connections to manipulate others into assisting her were all pieces of a plan that Rebecca had tried to execute with ruthless efficiency. As the trial neared its conclusion, the tension in the courtroom grew. The prosecution's closing arguments emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime, how Rebecca had viewed Leslie Harper as an obstacle to be removed, rather than a human being. They reminded the jury that Leslie had been a mother, a librarian, and a beloved member of her community whose life had been cut short because of one woman's selfish desires. The defense, in its final arguments, again tried to frame Rebecca as a victim of her circumstances, manipulated by those around her. But the weight of the evidence was too much to overcome. On November 14, 2000, the jury returned its verdict. After deliberating for just under 8 hours, they found Rebecca Pierce guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The verdict was read in a packed courtroom, with the Harper family sitting in the front row, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and relief. Michael Harper, who had testified earlier in the trial about his affair with Rebecca and the strain it had placed on his marriage, appeared gaunt and broken. The strain of the past year had visibly aged him, and the guilt he carried for his role in the events that led to his wife's death was evident. Rebecca, on the other hand, remained stoic as the verdict was read. Her once polished and composed demeanor had begun to crack during the trial, but in this final moment, she refused to show any outward emotion. She stared straight ahead, her lips pressed tightly together, as the reality of her fate set in. The sentencing phase of the trial was brief. Given the heinous nature of the crime and the overwhelming evidence, the judge had little choice but to impose the harshest sentence available. Rebecca Pierce was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. The same sentence had already been handed down to Noel Rodriguez, and though Emily Walker and Jordan Miller had cooperated with the prosecution, they too received lengthy prison terms for their roles in the conspiracy. For many in Glenview, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but it was a bittersweet victory. The town had been irrevocably changed by Leslie Harper's murder. What had once been a peaceful suburban enclave was now a community haunted by the brutal crime that had unfolded in their midst. The Harper family, in particular, was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Michael Harper, consumed by guilt, withdrew from public life, while his children struggled to come to terms with the loss of their mother. As the media frenzy surrounding the case began to die down, Rebecca Pierce was transported to a maximum security prison where she would begin serving her life sentence. The trial may have been over, but the echoes of the crime would linger in Glenview for years to come. In the end, the case served as a stark reminder of the dangerous consequences of unchecked ambition, jealousy, and betrayal. Leslie Harper, a woman who had simply wanted to keep her family together, had been caught in the crossfire of a twisted love triangle and paid the ultimate price. Though justice had been served, it could never undo the devastation left in the wake of her tragic death. In the months following the trial, Glenview gradually returned to its quiet, suburban routine, but the shadows of Leslie Harper's murder lingered. For the residents who had followed the trial with rapt attention, the end of the legal proceedings didn't mean the end of their reckoning with what had transpired. The tragic murder of a mother and wife, committed in the very heart of their community, became a dark chapter in the town's history, an ever-present reminder of the fragility of the normalcy they once took for granted. Michael Harper, whose affair with Rebecca Pierce had set the tragic events into motion, became a pariah in the eyes of many. Though he was never charged with any crime, the community viewed him as morally culpable. His public life unraveled, the business he had once run successfully suffered as clients distanced themselves. He sold the family home and moved out of state, hoping to escape the relentless guilt that had consumed him since the day of Leslie's murder. His children, now adults, faced their own struggles. The loss of their mother in such a brutal and senseless way left emotional scars that would take years to heal, if they ever could. The media's intense coverage of the trial had exposed every detail of their family's darkest moments, making it nearly impossible for them to find peace. They had always admired their mother for her resilience, her desire to keep the family together, even as their father's affair threatened to tear it apart. Now, they were left with only memories and the pain of knowing that the one person who had always fought for them was gone forever. Rebecca Pierce, once the glamorous and successful businesswoman, now sat in the confines of a maximum security prison, her life reduced to a narrow cell and daily routines monitored by guards. The power and control she had once wielded so easily were gone, replaced by a deep and hollow isolation. In the end, her ambition had destroyed not only Leslie Harper's life but her own as well. Any illusions she had about escaping justice or manipulating her way out of consequences were shattered. Life without parole stretched out before her, a lifetime to reflect on the terrible choices she had made. Noel Rodriguez, the hired gun who pulled the trigger, would never see the outside of prison walls again. His confession had spared him the death penalty, but there was no escaping the guilt that came with the knowledge that he had taken an innocent life. In his cell, Noel was haunted by the image of Leslie Harper's final moments, the sound of the gunshots that ended her life playing over and over in his mind. Emily Walker and Jordan Miller, though receiving lighter sentences due to their cooperation, also faced the consequences of their involvement in the plot. Their decisions to remain silent and not come forward sooner had allowed the murder to happen, and the guilt of their inaction would follow them long after their prison sentences were served. The Harper family story became something of a cautionary tale discussed in whispers at local gatherings and remembered with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. Glenview would never forget the events of October 4th, 1999, nor the unraveling of the perfect suburban facade that came with it. Life moved on as it always does, but the mark left by the crime was indelible. In the years following the trial, Michael Harper made an attempt to reach out to his children, seeking forgiveness for the role he played in their mother's death. While they tried to mend their fractured relationship, the pain ran deep. So the children, now grappling with their own lives and families, struggled to reconcile the father they had once known with the man whose choices had indirectly led to their mother's murder. Healing, they found, would take time if it came at all. In the end, Leslie Harper's legacy was not defined by the tragic circumstances of her death, but by the life she had led. She was remembered by her colleagues at the Glenview Public Library as a kind and dedicated librarian, a woman who loved books and believed in the power of knowledge. For her friends and neighbors, Leslie was a compassionate soul, someone who always took the time to listen and care for others. And for her children, despite everything they had endured, she remained the anchor of their family, a mother whose love for them had been unwavering. As the years passed, the community of Glenview slowly began to heal. The parking lot where Leslie was killed was redesigned and renamed in her honor, a small but poignant tribute to the woman whose life had been stolen too soon. The library erected a plaque in her memory, a place where her children and those who knew her could visit, remembering not how she died, but how she lived. The case of Leslie Harper's murder would eventually fade from the headlines, but it never fully left the hearts and minds of those who lived through it. For those who followed the case, it was a grim reminder of how betrayal, jealousy, and unchecked ambition can lead to devastating consequences. It served as a testament to the fragility of trust, the dangers of manipulation, and the dark paths that even the most ordinary lives can take when driven by selfish desires. In the end, justice had been served, but it came at an unimaginable cost. The lessons of the Harper case were clear. Behind the perfect facades of suburban life, darkness can lurk, and when it does, the consequences can be deadly. Leslie Harper's story was a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, tragedy can strike, leaving behind a legacy of grief, resilience, and the pursuit of justice that would never be forgotten.